Hello and very warm welcome to the Arise interview, 60 minutes of big questions about the big stories from the news and beyond with fresh insights and critical analysis. I am Christian Ogodo. Thanks for joining us. And coming up in the next hour, the Covid-19 pandemic has taken its toll on the rights of Nigerians. The disease containment approaches adopted across the country, especially by state governors, reinforce fears of deliberate governmental clampdowns on freedoms using COVID-19 as excuse. And we have seen a group of coronavirus patients being treated at isolation centers in northeastern Nigeria, protesting against ill treatment by the government. And we have heard and seen high-handedness of security operatives in the country during this period. Now, the National Human Rights Commission has moved for the protection of the rights of COVID-19 patients in isolation centers. A new set of guidelines is out. We'll speak to the head of Nigeria's Human Rights Commission, who is the Executive Secretary. And later, we'll bring to you highlights from the launching of the superbly brilliant This Day COVID-19 Treatment Center, which has a capacity of over 260 bed space. This Day 54 Gene 24-hour testing laboratory with a capacity of handling 200 to 1,000 tests per day, aimed at enhancing government efforts in the fight against coronavirus. All coming up in a moment. The National Human Rights Commission has released a set of standard minimum guidelines for the protection of the rights of COVID-19 patients in treatment centers across Nigeria, following the increasing violations of human rights of patients in treatment centers. The Executive Secretary of the Commission, Barrister Tony Ojukwu, said the new set of guidelines contain human rights guarantees for COVID-19 patients. Also, the Commission recommends that the name isolation centers be changed to treatment centers to avoid stigmatization. The Commission urges the federal government to study and put mechanisms in place to implement the new guidelines.
The guidelines contain human rights guarantees such as the right to life, health, dignity, privacy, religion, protection from discrimination of COVID-19 patients. It also contains provisions aimed at ensuring access to adequate accommodation, food, water, and sanitation by patients at the treatment centers, as well as social protection for vulnerable groups like women, children, persons with disabilities, older persons, people with mental health challenges, and so on. So why these guidelines? The COVID-19 pandemic has taken its toll on the enjoyment of human rights, not only in Nigeria, but all over the world.
Well, for more on this, I've now been joined by the Executive Secretary of the National Human Rights Commission, Tony Ojukwu, who is a lawyer. Very warm welcome to the Arise interview. It's a huge, well, not so huge, but very far-reaching document you got here, Tony. And this, of course, got extracts from Section 39 of the 1999 Nigerian Constitution as amended. What have been your worries and fears that necessitated this document?
Well, you see that the way things are going, there are a lot of protests going on from these isolation centers. You saw what happened, the embarrassment the other day in Gombe, where people in these centers trooped out to the streets and mingled with those who were in quotes not yet diagnosed as positive. And only God knows how many people that day would have gotten infected because of that interaction. And then there have also been cases in Jos, there have been cases in Kwara, there have been cases in Niger and Kano. So we can't go on like this. That means there is something wrong with the way that been managed. And we felt that there's a missing link. The missing link is mainstreaming human rights into how these centers are run. Don't forget, as much as they are a treatment center, it's also a holding center. So there must be some standards to keep such centers so that human rights can be respected, and you will see there will be an end to this kind of embarrassment and demonstrations going on. So we felt it is very, very important at the inception like this to streamline, to put in place minimum guidelines, which we believe that if these are followed, it will bring an end to all the complaints and current violations that are going on in the treatment centers.
Well, it's a good thing. I mean, you've rolled out you called it the standard minimum guidelines for the human rights of COVID-19 patients in treatment centers in Nigeria. There's been a lady who's been in isolation or quarantine now for over 45 days from Benue. She came in from the UK and she's not tested neither positive nor negative, nor rather, she's not even been shown any tests. You've not raised your commission's voice to that. She's right there at the National Hospital here in Abuja.
Yeah, that particular patient is a little tricky one. Right from the beginning, when that patient was in Benue, we waded into the matter. I spoke to her personally, and we've also interacted with the Ministry of Health, and that led to her being moved. After complaints in Benue, she was now moved to Abuja. Even the day when she was being moved in Abuja, I spoke to her while she was in the ambulance. And what I can understand, her worries that her right to privacy was not respected when her identity was given out at the initial inception, which I believe were part of the early mistakes made in the management of COVID-19 patients, which is part of what we're talking about, respecting the human rights of the patients while being treated. But then the protocols must also be respected, because from the interactions I had with her, I found she was a little bit reluctant to submit herself to the procedures, the protocols in terms of being tested and so on and so forth. I've had comments from her saying that there were mistakes in the identity of the ownership of the test results that have come out. But in each of the cases anyway, she has tested positive all through, and the protocols are that unless you test negative twice, you won't leave that detention, those treatment centers. So my advice to her would be, why not submit yourself to the authorities and go through the process others are going through. Once your test becomes negative and you are not treated the same way others are treated, then it becomes an issue of discrimination. But as long as she continues to defy the directives, to accept being tested to see whether she could test negative, it's going to be difficult to say exclude her from following the protocols. So they said, if you must come to equity, you must come with clean hands. If you need the assistance of everybody, you must be seen to be obeying the guidelines, so that we can eliminate, because this is science, because you can't unleash somebody who has tested positive to the public, because it's both her own safety and the safety of others. So my advice would be, yes, you are right, may have been violated, but please cooperate so that the issue of testing as to whether she's positive or not can be ruled out, and then we can now look at other aspects of her rights that have been violated.
Okay, well, your submission just tempers that of the great Greco-Roman literary giant Horatius Flaccus, who said, if you want me to show you pity, you must first, show pity. All right, let's move on and look at some of the key guidelines that you have reeled out. It's both to the federal, to the state governments, and all those in authorities. Trying to mitigate the COVID-19 measures. But some people, there have been different arguments, particularly over the demolition of 2 hotels in Rivers State. Some have described the governor's action as high-handed, despite the Executive Order 6 and the rest. What's the your commission, doing about that?
Well, I mean, what is going on in Rivers State is of serious concern to the human rights understanding of the Commission. We are studying the situation. We've called our legal department to get the necessary documents based on which the governor acted. But on the face value, looking at it without conclusion in examining all the documents, peripherally you will see, for instance, you cannot be a judge in your own case as well. Yes, somebody violates the guidelines for COVID-19, but then there has to be due process. You must take the person to a court for violating the guidelines, and then the person is tried formally and then sentenced. So if Governor Wike felt that that hotel or the ownership of that hotel have violated the guidelines, it should bring up the case against that hotel in the mobile court or whatever process that's in the. But it cannot lie on his hand to decide on his own that this person has violated the guidelines, and he goes ahead to demolish the hotel. That is why it is being described as high-handedness. That is why it's being described as impunity. Our understanding of a law is that the executive or the judiciary, like the law was made by the legislator, there is room for the executive to make regulations based under that law, but the judiciary has to interpret and impose the appropriate sentence. Governor Wike cannot make the executive order and himself also executing it. No, unless there's a pronouncement by a court of competent jurisdiction. As far as lawyers are concerned, the action is doubtful whether it is in accordance with respect for human rights.
So there is a violation of the rights of those proprietors of those hotels.
Certainly.
Okay, Tony, we want to take some messages. When we return, we'll look at how the security agencies have fared in mitigating or containing the measures put in place by government for COVID-19. You're still watching the Arise interview. We've got more still ahead. Stay with us. You're welcome back to the Arise interview with me, Christian Ogdowa, live in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Thanks for staying with us. The recent worries expressed by the National Human Rights Commission are real. In combating the spread of COVID-19 in Nigeria, security agents have killed about 20 Nigerians in enforcing measures outlined to curtail the spread of the disease. The new sets of measures rolled out by the Rights Commission will be applicable to federal and state governments, all public and private centers, and all other facilities in Nigeria where COVID-19 patients are being treated. Another key issue in the guidelines is that the rights and guarantees enunciated shall be enforceable by any patients or persons who have suffered violation in accordance with the Constitution.
These guidelines was as a result of incessant violation of rights of patients in treatment centers in some parts of the country, which has resulted in protests and in some cases abscondment of patients. It is as a result of that the Commission deemed it fit to issue these guidelines in order to ensure that the basic rights of patients are guaranteed and protected. While commending the government and health authorities at the federal and state levels for efforts already made to put facilities in place in these centers and for other palliatives, we urge them to study and put mechanisms in place to implement the standard minimum guidelines. We note that these patients whose rights have been violated will have the option of seeking redress before the Commission or in the courts as provided by the Constitution.
Okay, I still have with me the Executive Secretary of the National Human Rights Commission, Tony Ojukwu. Tony, I remember a couple of weeks ago you expressed great consternation about the annihilation by security agencies of Nigerians just in the enforcement of this COVID-19 measures and the rest. How many do you have Nigerians that have been killed by security agents, and how have you further responded to such high-handedness? Have there been compensations to the families of those killed?
Well, in the first place, we set out to monitor the law enforcement and of the COVID-19 regulations. From the beginning, we issued advisory telling members of the public to expect that some of their rights will be restricted, but it is in the interest of public safety
because
and public,
of the emergency situation.
Emergency situation, exactly. And after the presidential announcement of the lockdown, we also advised security agencies that while they are enforcing the lockdown, please let them make sure that at least they respect the rights of Nigerians. And we also told them we're going to monitor any violations. And we called on members of the public. We set up hotlines and gave that out to the members of the public. We also did an app with some of our development partners to see where, and so on and so forth. We set on an app where we encourage people to be sending in complaints, because we cannot be everywhere, but in these days of ICT, people responded, and we were able to record about 105 complaints in the first 2 weeks of the lockdown. That was from the 31st of...
like the kind of excesses was seen right on the screen now by men of the mobile police force.
Exactly.
Exactly.
This kind of situation, yes, if somebody has violated the law
or a provision of the law,
do you start damaging all those things, or you just lock up the place, take the man away, and go and try him in a mobile court? And it can be maybe a sentence of 100,000 naira or community service for 2 weeks and so on and so forth. But you can see them taking the law into their hands, dishing out punishment, at times torturing people, and the torture is not allowed. So we foresaw this, and we decided to document this.
And 105 complaints in the
first 2 weeks, And out of that, you recall that there were about 18 extrajudicial killings in the first 2 weeks. And we had to scream, we had to say, look, even COVID itself had only killed 11, as at that time, that had only killed 11 Nigerians. And then how will law enforcement agents who are supposed to enforce the lockdown go as far as that? And after that, we continued monitoring. We now entered the second phase again. That was from 14th of April to 3rd of May, and we recorded another 104 violations. But you can see, while 105 violations in 2 weeks, then 104 violations in 3 weeks. So that means at least the violations had reduced. And then instead of the first time when we had 18 extrajudicial killings, we now had 11. So substantially, that means there was some restraint in the way the law enforcement agents were carrying out their duties.
So 29 Nigerians have been extrajudicially murdered by security agencies.
Exactly. But the good thing is this: the authorities have condemned this. From the president to the chairman of the presidential task force to the inspector general of police, all of them have condemned all these kind of actions. So what we expect is that those officers who are responsible for this will be held accountable. Already, not all of them, but some of those officers are now going through orderly room trial,
interdiction,
and so on and so forth. But we want a holistic accountability for each and every violation that has happened. And the president has directed so, and I think the supervising ministries are geared to. We are liaising with them, we are talking with them, we have sent all these documents to them, and they have promised to investigate them. And we'll be hearing in the future what accountability action has resulted from all these violations.
Okay, good to know that you're putting your feet down. The commission is putting its feet down to really get those people tried, because it's not acceptable at all.
No, it's
in
not.
A democracy, in any civilized society.
Exactly.
Okay, you talked about in your new guidelines, you ruled out, rights to religious observances, and one would say that at this time, that will have this emergency, the churches and mosques, all religious worship places have been closed, not to further spread the distance. Why are you emphasizing that in your standard guidelines?
Yeah, because the treatment centers are not large places, and these are places where people can, on personal grounds, carry out their religious entitlement. So we're not envisaging. After all, you can even understand that a group of 20 or 50 people can gather as long as there is physical distancing and wearing of masks and so on and so forth. And in the isolation centers, individuals should be able to do their religious obligations in their rooms or in their cubicles. We think that is doable. And even now, all of us stay in our homes and celebrate Mass on Sunday. If a family is made up of 10 people or 5 people, they sit down in the sitting room, observe safe physical distancing, and are able to worship their God. So we think that people in isolation centers should have that leverage to be able to fulfill their religious obligations.
Okay, that's commendable too. Another major issue you raised in the standard guidelines on page 7 is the treatment of persons with disabilities. We know how, like a bicycle, the authorities have been in taking care of people who are physically challenged, or mentally challenged as well, and the rest. This raises great concern. Have you heard any such complaints from some of these people, or you just envisage it, knowing the kind of climb we operate in?
Yeah, this is a standard human rights document, so it has to meet all the trappings of modern standard of what is expected of the people who are taking care of people in these treatment centers. There will be people who are handicapped who may test positive to COVID-19, so we must prepare for them. There will be children who will test positive. We must prepare for them. There will be children. There will be people with hearing impairment. There will be people who probably have mental issues. So we should not run a center that has not made provision for this vulnerable group, because by virtue of their vulnerability, they're already handicapped. And then if they now test positive to COVID-19, and they get to a center and these basic things are not there, you can then imagine that they are suffering double jeopardy.
Okay. So, and one way again that you've tried that Nigerians don't suffer double jeopardy is that they cannot be forced to be vaccinated, particularly with trial vaccines or any mixture.
You're right.
Or that
you must clearly be explained to, and you have to voluntarily accept to be vaccinated.
Verbally or written, in written form?
Well, in the hospitals, I mean, most communications are verbal, and there may be need for you to
The trial vaccines, you know, is going to cut across whether you have the COVID or not. It's going to serve as first preventive.
Yeah, but it should not be compulsorily applied on anybody. You must accept to apply it, because
the National Human Rights Commission is going to probably have that opportunity before the House of one of the committees on the House of Representatives to be saying all this. So you're going to appear there, and what are you going to be putting forward?
We'll have a day there. We'll have a day, and we're going to make our views known. The human rights must be respected in and of course everybody knows that patients are entitled to their privacy, and their consent ought to be expected before you can administer even some treatment on them, you know, even though it's for their own good. But these are trial vaccines. So if I don't want to be tried on it, you cannot force me to do it. Cannot force me.
Because you have said here in this document that trial shall, a clinical trial shall give a written concept in the presence of an informed family member or a legal representative.
So that we are sure that the consent is real consent. So that we are sure that the consent is really not a kind of concocted consent.
Coaxed consent, probably.
Exactly.
Thanks so very much, Barrister Tony Ojukwu, Executive Secretary of the National Human Rights Commission, for coming to share this latest standard minimum guidelines for the human rights of COVID-19 patients in treatment centers across Nigeria.
Thank you very much.